expected. We were all anticipating just a short while ago, and boom, it's come and it's gone. But we understand that, well, certainly in this segment, we need to deepen the focus rather than spreading it out. We've had it spread out during the early parts of the day, and that's deliberate. And now we seek to deepen the discussion on the economy. And as I always tell my guests, well, I've certainly told them for this program, I have one essential question. And that question deals with how we are going to grow the economy into the future. I'm not talking about 0.5% growth or 1% growth, which is not stable and can go in different ways sooner or later. Not sustainable, but rather something a little bit more than that. And as we all know, we talk about an economy that is based on the energy sector, oil and gas and petrochemicals, and well, we've talked about this for 60, 70 years about spreading and diversifying the economy. The talk has been talked, and the economists have written and talked about it, but we have not been successful in really spreading the economy. So I want that to be the focus, and therefore I have assembled some people who have been talking about these kinds of things and whose responsibility it is in terms of the manufacturing sector, in terms of economists. We have some academic economists, some commercial economists. My good friend Dr. Ronald Ramkissoon is on the telephone line. Good afternoon to you, Ronald.
Good afternoon, Tony, and good afternoon to the other panelists. And
the other panelists we have would be Franca Costello, who is the president of the TTMA, and well, the economy depends on the manufacturing sector in significant ways to move us from where we are. And we have my good friend Nigel Gittins, no stranger to the program. He's been here a couple of times, and Nigel is a trained engineer, but he has decided that the engineering business is not as exciting as looking at the economic prospects for the country. So he has written a couple of books. The most recent one is Sustainable World, Nigel Gittins, Utilitarian Economy, and he wrote one previously that dealt with the whole business of land and the distribution and production of land reform. So welcome to the program, folks, and a little bit later on we're going to have my colleague Curtis Williams, a journalist who looks at the energy sector. But I want to start off with Dr. Ramkissoon. And I don't know if you've got an opportunity, Dr. Ramkissoon, to look at the central bank's financial stability report yet. Have you?
Yes, I've taken a brief look at it.
Okay, great. And Ronald Ramkissoon is a former commercial banker, and I believe you started off at the central bank, yes?
That's right, yes.
In the research department. Yeah. So this is the kind of thing that you researched and wrote about. The thing that struck me in looking at it, and I haven't read it completely, but the thing that struck me is this business of the growing household indebtedness. And just let me read a paragraph from it so that we get a perspective, and I'll tell you how we move from the monetary aspects into the developmental aspects in a moment. So household debt has risen consistently over the past few years and continues to be a potential source of vulnerability in the financial system. And why I'm making the connection? Because the financial system is critical to the investment, critical to development, etc., etc. But Ronald is the expert, and he will talk about that in a moment. But just let me finish the paragraph. The central bank says the estimated household debt burden stood at $55.6 billion in 2018. Let me say that again. The household debt, meaning what you and I owe to the banks and financial institutions, $55.6 billion in 2018, which was 4.1% higher than in the previous year. So it's going up, and represents roughly 35% of GDP, which is the kind of comparisons that economists make all the time. The banking sector accounts for 60% of total estimated household debt. So that's one segment of the financial sector. In turn, the sector's exposure to households are not insignificant at 22.6% on 160.5% of its assets and capital. Ronald will disaggregate all of that economist talk in a moment. So, given this, and I'm saying, Ronald Ramkisoon and all my panelists, is that while the bank says it is a risk, but it's not, because of the strength of the financial sector, and especially the banking sector, it doesn't pose a high risk. They have some pictures of it, and my memory serves me right. I will get it first before I venture on my memory. What I'm saying to Ronald and Nigel and Franca is that if we have a financial sector that is growing in debt, we have people losing jobs frequently. We have, this morning I heard Gregory Aboud from the Port of Spain, what's it called? The Downtown Owners Association, saying that what has transpired in the last few months is a kind of stabilizing of the situation. They are no longer losing revenue, losing customers, but it's stable. It is not growing, it is stable. And I'm saying that if this situation continues into the future, we are certainly going to come to a point. In fact, we are at a point now where we need something more, Ronald, than simple 0.5%, 1% growth to be able to move off the total dependence that we have on energy. Is that a fair conclusion to come to?
Well, Tony, I don't know which one of the questions or issues you raised you would like me to start with.
Take your choice.
But if I'm to go with the last one, we have seen some stability in the main macroeconomic indicators. I should say some of them. And that is positive. So the unemployment rate, though rising, still remains relatively low by all standards. Let me
but we must say, Ronald,
that there are people have lost their jobs in certain industries, as we are familiar with, Petrotrin being one of them, TSTP and so on. As companies adjust to the realities of Trinidad and Tobago in 2019, the marginal growth has come about principally because of the increase in natural gas availability. So, and the knock-on effect on the petrochemical sector and then on the non-energy economy. So we have had some stability, but when we look at the economy, we don't only look at the variables that are stable or that are moving in the right direction. To be sensible, we must look at those as well that are moving in undesired direction. And one that comes to mind, of course, is the foreign reserve. And that is not moving in a desirable direction because our stock is falling to some 7-point-something billion US dollars from, I think, over 11 billion. And that is not the correct direction for reserves to move in the context of what we have here. The external debt has also been increasing. The total debt has been increasing, reaching over 62% or thereabouts, and expected to rise. And that is not a good thing. So, on the other hand, inflation remains relatively low at just around 1%. So there are a mix of the variables, and we need to look at all, not just the increase in growth. We also need to remember on this issue of growth, whether it is 2%, which is the average that the minister expects by 2021, or 0.5 or 0.9 or even minus, whatever. Growth in GDP does not tell the whole story of the life of citizens in Trinidad and Tobago at the present time. And I think we need to take that into account. that there are other factors that are affecting how people live, conditions under which they live. And we must also be very much aware of that, and aware that notwithstanding the relative stability and the relative growth, there are major issues that contribute towards life and happiness of the individual citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, some of those issues have to be addressed by government, and of course there are those that have to be addressed by the individuals themselves as they seek to move their individual lives forward.
Yeah,
so I will stop there, Tony.
Sure, okay, but just let me push you a little bit again before I go to the other panelists. I'm saying, Dr. Ramkisoon, that given all that you've said, and given my initial comments, and look at what the central bank is saying, that we need to do something for economic development outside of the energy sector. And when I say the energy sector, I mean both upstream and downstream operations, to get the economy to a position where it can really start servicing the needs of the country. And my question is that, what do we do to get that movement in the economy?
What do we do to get the kind of growth that
sustainable over a period of time, and that will tend to those needs?
Yes. So it is important that the quality of growth is considered as well. So it is not just the 1%, 0.9%, 2%, whatever. The quality of that growth. Is it going to be based on consumption? If it is, then we are going to put a lot of pressure on the exchange rate. So we have to be very much aware of that. The growth that we want must be, I would say, upwards of 5%. It is what we should be aiming for. And we will get that growth to be sustainable to the extent that it is export-oriented growth, which is based not on one product or one sector, the energy sector as it has traditionally been, but on a broader range of economic activities. So we have said this over and over. The growth, for it to be sustainable, must be based on a broader range of export-oriented activities. If it is to be higher and if it is to be sustainable, we cannot depend solely on the natural gas and on the oil when we could increase production. So I think that is clear. Higher growth must be export-oriented, and it must come from a wider mix of sectors. Historically, we have seen that so long as we depend on one sector, the growth is not going to be sustainable.
Okay, and that's why I've invited Franca Costello to come talk to us, because while we focus on the state and some of the energy-based industry will be naturally left to the state to get involved in, perhaps with greater partnerships from local investors and so on. So the question to you, Franca, is the manufacturing sector capable of beginning to go beyond, say, CARICOM, to earn the kind of revenue that is required, export revenue that Ronald Ramkisoon talked about? And if it is not in its natural state, its present state, then what are the things required? So two questions. Is the sector capable? And if not, or if not fully, then what is required?
The sector is a manufacturing sector of any country has the capacity to be the sustainable revenue driver for a country. And a sustainable meaning that it doesn't have the ups and downs that our oil and gas sector would bring. So sustainable being the key word in the equation, and I agree that the growth should be 5%. 2% is ambitious for where we are now, but 5% should be where we essentially do have to aim for. But what is most recognizable of what Dr. Amkasoon said is that it can't just be 5% based on natural gas. It has to be 5% based across sectors, and sectors that are going to build sustainability into the economy. And that is manufacturing. To specifically answer your question, is the manufacturing sector of Trinidad ready to take up that charge? The statistics always say it. We're 8% of the GDP. That means no, we're not. We need to have development and we need to be invested in. So like any project, like anywhere that anything that you see where the viability is, you invest time, energy, resources into building out that foundation. Do we have some of the advantages for it? Absolutely. We have the geography, we have location, we have the people, we have the skill sets, we have the energy to give us that edge over other locations. So when an investor is looking for a location to come to the Caribbean, South American market, Trinidad should be the most obvious location to choose, because we have all of the resources that that cannot be created. So, you know, God don't make land no more, and we have a lot of it. And we have a very skilled population that we invested in years and years ago. So we have an exceptionally skilled population with a very high degree education. We have a new influx of labor coming in with pros and cons to it. Everything can either be a problem or a solution, depending on how we handle it, right? So there is the opportunity and there is the necessity at this point, necessity to build out the manufacturing sector in Trinidad.
Yeah. And there is your good friend Shiraz Khan likes to quote these figures. I had it at $6 billion in terms of the food import bill. He says it's 8 now. So there are opportunities there to cut back inside. So the question I always pose to people from the private sector, entrepreneurial enterprise.
Yes.
Is that present? And just for our listeners' sake, what do I mean by that? I mean that we have a historical development of traders. If you go back to the 18th century, the 17th century even, and coming along, people have traded, got brands from Europe, from America, etc., etc. And that has been a convenient living, depending on whether it was sugar and more recently energy-based industry and so on. Do we have that kind of get-up and go? You're one of the from the sector, Franco. Do you see it?
All the time. I think that Trinidadians are one of the most innovative group of people that you'll find worldwide. And once we have a passion for something, there's no chasing it away. We really go after it. We're creative, we're innovative, and we are driven. When we want to do something, we go for it. The challenge is that for the entrepreneur is that they get to a certain stage where becoming legitimate is more tasking than they're allowed to. So
what do you mean by legitimate in that context?
Registered, paying taxes, a participating citizen within the corporate community. So the bureaucracies of the corporate world become so tiresome, so inefficient, and so burdening that becoming our ease of doing business, our ranking on the ease of doing business is deteriorating. And so I always quote that in 2018 the GCI ranked us at 105, when in 2012 we were rated 63. We've dropped off. There's been some marginal improvement.
There's a significant drop off.
Jamaica's at 64 and Costa Rica is at 43. Why is our position worsening when it should be improving? When we're supposed to be amping up our game and becoming more competitive?
Why?
Why?
So you've identified bureaucracy.
Bureaucracy. Well,
What
there's
else?
crime, there's poor work ethic, there's corruption, there's lack of financing, in particular the FX shortages. And each one of these is a negative cycle that deepens the well of the other. But in so doing, so does the positive cycle. Once you start to improve one, you start to work away and chip away at them as well. But entrepreneurial, absolutely, Trinidadians are very entrepreneurial. We just need to create the framework that pivots them forward, spirals them, gives them that nudge that doesn't make it. That should not be the hard part.
Okay. All right, let me turn to Nigel Gittins now. Nigel, your book before this one talked quite a lot about looking towards a taxation system that will focus on the land as a means of getting investment and entrepreneurship going. But I don't want to restrict you to that. I just tick that off as a start for you. What are the things that are required for us to get this growth that is required?
If you remember that on that book had a diagram that spoke to the balancing of the economy. I think what we focus on in Trinidad is balancing the budget. Make sure that the revenue and the expenditure are in line. Not too concerned about the fundamentals, what is actually creating the revenue, what is hindering production of wealth. So the focus should really be on balancing the economy. What do I mean by that? An economy is made up of three factors of production: land, labor, and capital. I ask you the question, is it easy to acquire land by the common person, by the common worker, for housing, for business? Is it easy to access capital? And why? Are we happy with our productivity in labor? So balancing the economy means that these three factors come into balance, one not necessarily more expensive than the other. So that, for instance, land values in this country are extremely high. So in order for you to set up a business or to sustain and maintain a business, you have to deal with the value of land, paying your mortgages, paying your land rent, paying your acquiring land to do business is extremely difficult in this country, especially with a gas and oil economy which powers the price of land, raising it up and up. Even in this recession, price of land is still very high. So my concern in my books are really about balancing the economy so that business could be possible.
I have written, subsequent to reading your book actually, a few months afterwards, a thought that I've had for a long time about state lands being distributed. And when I say distributed, different forms of distribution. I'm not saying give away state lands. I'm not saying charge, as the normal saying goes, a pound on a crown for state lands, but distributed because 50-60% of the lands in the country belong to the state. A lot of them are lying fallow, to use the agricultural term. Should there be some kind of distribution arrangement to make lands available for production?
Well, I wouldn't limit it to the state lands, because if you go through any community, a lot of the lands lie fallow, unproductive, underproducing, right? So what, for instance, in Port of Spain or in San Fernando in particular, a lot of derelict properties, not producing anything, not producing wealth, not producing housing, What could we do? What could be done to bring these lands into production, to bring them into activity? I am proposing in my books something called a site value taxation, which is the taxation of the value of the sites that will bring lands that are suitable for all types of activity: industrial, agricultural, housing, commercial. Even in Port of Spain, if you want to set up, if you want to access land for commercial purposes, it's expensive. But a site value tax, where the tax goes back to the state, will force those owners
people into production.
Yeah, but forces owners of lands, whoever they may be, if they are living or dead, a lot of them are dead, and not people don't know, who are the owners of these lands, forcing it onto the market.
But I'm saying, in response to that, the government may find itself, the state may find itself giving out lands for another mall.
But I don't.
Which
Well,
I don't
the
know is
market
something
itself,
that we need.
The market itself will determine what it needs.
I see a lot of head shaking. The people who believe
and
in
you
the
can't
magic
limit it
of
to
the
state
market.
lands, because all lands are contiguous. I mean, all lands location is suitable for this or for that.
Let me get some reaction both from Dr. Ramkisoon and Franca in the studio.
Well, let me say, Tony, I agree very much with where I think Nigel is going. In other words, if I have land, if a private land that I'm not putting to use, and it is something that the taxation system can be used to ensure that I at least keep it clean, keep it in order, put it into productive use, sell it or something. And those kinds of policies are very much in operation in the developed world. But perhaps the more important point has to do with land titles. The titling of land will unlock a great potential in the area of agriculture and agro-processing. And those factors on the economic side, of course, land ownership, very important from a social standpoint and from the view that a society and people would feel that they belong. So I think we need to do quite a lot in terms of how the limited land is distributed, what it is used for, and how we treat with it. We need to remember we are Twin Island state, land is limited. Arable land, land for particular purposes are limited, although we might look around and say, oh, there's a lot of land here and there and so on. Really, how much of it is arable land, how much of it we can do things with, I think are important consideration.
And just my question on that, from a kind of different perspective, is that how do we begin this distribution process? Because the farmers, and we always have Shiraz, farmers don't have the kind of capital base that other people have in the society. How do we approach this distribution? And I suppose my natural inclination is towards a socialist type economy. Don't kill me for that. I know Nigel is not into that, but it's okay. I could stand
but I
alone
would
on
say,
that.
Tony,
Yes.
your assumption about farmers do not have the wherewithal. I don't think that is quite correct in my view. There are some who would certainly need state support. There are, of course, the ADB, there are, of course, ways and means for ensuring that. But the simple point of entitling people, land that they have been on, that they need to care up and assign to them, there are certain issues that need to be dealt with there. So I don't know that we even reach the issue of distribution or redistribution, and even so, there are very efficient ways of market economy, once they are titles, can work that through, just as happens in the developed world. But that primary assumption of most farmers do not have the wherewithal, I will take that with a pinch of salt.
Okay, Nigel is dying to respond, especially to my socialist notions.
No, let me before I respond to the socialist notion, let me put it to you that taxation on labor proves to be acts as a disincentive to labor. Not so? Taxation on capital leads to capital flight, as leads to tax evasion, lots of tax evasion in Trinidad. taxation on land values. Land is out of doors. You can't hide it. You have to either pay the tax or give up the land to somebody who would use the land for productive purposes. Now, to the question of distribution that you asked about, you could easily set up a land bank and exchange system which will allow for the buying and selling of land and at a faster rate. This whole question of title is really it has proved to be a real delaying thing in the whole production process, development process.
I don't know, you're right on that. I don't know where the Caroni lands distribution thing has got to.
The focus will now be on paying the tax so that we could acquire the title to the land. Once you pay the tax, right?
Let's hear Franca, who I'm sure is totally opposed to this notion of mine that I'm not saying that you give away land.
It would augment the capitalist system as you did. It's not socialism at all, because it's speeding up.
That's another story. I'm not saying give away, you go on a giving away spree, but I'm saying that you make provision for whether it's farmers, entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs who don't have the wherewithal, who the banks don't want to talk to, period. Is that you have some system that you give them possession. Of course, it's not going to be possession. You build a house, whatever you have to do. It has to be into productive use. And that is my position.
So, as Dr. Rankinson said, it might seem as though you have a lot of land, but only some of it is actually usable land, and some of it is better suited for other things. So when you look at the map of Trinidad specifically, this area is ideal for residential, this area is ideal for port situation, agriculture, industrial use, and so on. And so yes, you definitely designate, you prioritize, look by location and by quantity per sector of what needs. So import substitution and the amount of food that we import, absolutely, it should be grown locally, and we should be investing in our agriculture. And the tax that is put on agriculture, for example, the property tax was proposed at 1% for agriculture, as opposed to industrialized was proposed at 6%. So there's a clear incentive there on agriculture. Industrial parks are designed to designate areas specific per sector for manufacturing growth. So in Trinidad we have 17 existing industrial parks and 2 new coming on, and they're situated in various locations across Trinidad, some better than others. Some were considered for different industries, food in this area, construction in that area, paper and such. So if I'll stay in my crease with the manufacturing and focus on, as we're speaking about physical space in the industrial parks, and I reiterate that there is a need for our industrial parks to be up to scratch on a competitively global standard, because that is where we compete. We do not compete in Trinidad or the CARICOM or South America only. We compete globally. That is where the global front for the capital market is at. So our industrial parks, the question is, are they to a standard where they encourage manufacturers to allow to compete on a global market? And if you have visited our park, you would quickly say, no, cannot be. That cannot be the case.
So what is lacking?
There's a lack of technology. The infrastructure is not built for modern day use. These parks were built some 25 years ago, 30, some 18, different ages, but generally all over 15 years, right? And they're lacking the technology that's built in. So as simple as overhead lines. The roads are not wide enough for container use. We do not facilitate parking needs of the employment that is held within. We used to be a country where public transportation was more readily used, or shared driving, but now everybody owns their own our vehicles are dominating the roads. Shared services, we do not have community services that are built in, that are supportive of a new demographic of the labor force. So we have 42% of our labor force is women. That means that and women carry a whole different line of responsibilities in the labor force. So our industrial parks, they're there, which is great. We have 19, which is great, all advantages. And it's as simple as investing in them to invite investment into Trinidad.
And who's responsible for that?
This is easily can easily be a 50-50 partnership arrangement. And this is where
50-50 between the state and the private sector?
Why not? I mean, private sector could easily say it's public sector's responsibility. They own it, we lease it from them, we rent it from them. We could say they're our landlord and that it's their responsibility. But private sector is not saying that. We are so hungry for the opportunity to make it better, to make it work, so we can grow, that we're saying let us work with you on this partnership.
Okay, so just tell our listeners that we are continuing our all-day discussion, looking at the economy, looking at the, we started off at the point actually taking off from the finance minister's statement of 2 weeks ago at the review of the budget, and his indication that, I remember there's a quote on the station that is going, $7 billion spent over the last 3 or 4 years, I think is his figure, and that is his statement with regard to stability in the economy, and people are spending again, and people have some confidence in what is happening. And I mentioned before, earlier this morning, Gregory Aboud of the Downtown Merchants Association was saying that as far as the merchants are concerned, their sales have gone up a little bit and stabilized at a point, but it's not as bad as it used to be, but it surely is not on the path to growth going forward. I want to focus now for all of us on what is happening in the energy sector in terms of its ability, or giving us a sense that there is going to be some movement into the future. And for that, I have my colleague on the line, Curtis Williams, who, as you know, is the, what's your title, Curtis? The manager of the Business Guardian or something like that, but he focuses a lot on the energy sector. So Curtis can give us a sense of what is happening in the energy sector to give any hope that we are going to move beyond the present stage.
Good afternoon, Lee, and good afternoon to your panel. Are you hearing me?
Loud and clear.
Okay. I think that it's really a big situation to the energy sector, simply because we've had some movement upstream in terms of increased gas production. But of course, we know of the BP situation and what that means in relation to the future, simply because we've had two failed Phil West and BPTD funds that could negatively impact their production up to 15% in 2020 and 2021. So, but that's on the upstream side. We've had some success with PHP. We don't know enough information as the extent of that success, but they certainly have that they found gas in the deep water, oil, which a lot of people feel is going to be important if we're going to make those finds crucial because of the cost of the infrastructure that will be required to bring that gas to market. But I think very concerning would be what's happening midstream in terms of the NGC and their margins, and word that the NGC is making little, if any, profit at the moment, and certainly downstream, where I think there's a study done by Dr. Karen Farrell that looks at the downstream and says really the downstream cannot afford to pay for the kind of prices that are being charged for natural gas, and in 10 years' time, we could be in real jeopardy of not having the kind of downstream that we thought we have now, and that we worked so hard for because of the issues of both gas concealment and of course the cost of natural gas.
Let me ask you about the particular situation that we have with regard to the failure of the BP TT project coming on stream and producing the kind of gas that is required. So there must be a sense of a curtailment in the gas supply to go further downstream. You wrote a couple of weeks ago about the possibility of a Shell project, Shell meaning the company, coming on stream, and I note that the Prime Minister and the Energy Minister and somebody else have gone to London to talk with Shell. What are the possibilities for gas coming into the system from Shell?
Well, our reporting at the Business Guardian is that at Shell, there's a possibility that Shell could come to the rescue. As you know, Shell has been negotiating for almost a year now with the government on what they call global kind of agreement, which I think is what you signed today in The Hague. And that global agreement deals with many things. That is to say, the renewal of some of those blocks. For your listeners, the way in which things are done in the energy sector. You have what blocks which are areas of operating. So you have some of those blocks like Dolphin and so I think 6E and 6B that will coming to an end or come to an end in about a year to 2 years time. And Shell was saying, if you're going to negotiate new blocks which require, which is on those old blocks, we can't sign unless we know if we produce in this new block, we could continue to use the old block to feed that gas into it. And that's to be in a kind of rudiment kind of way. So Shell has block 5C and 5D, which are the blocks that the gas has before it's taken over by Shell. And they can easily produce those blocks by drilling them out. Hopefully, those blocks have already had gas that was discovered and therefore gone. And they can develop that gas. And the plan is to tie it back to the Dolphin platform, which is close by subsea development. So it doesn't require the building of a platform and those kinds of things that will take a year and a half to 2 years to build. And it is in that context, there is the hope that Shell, which is by themselves the major shareholder in Train 1 anyway, and the entire Atlantic, Shell would then be able to drill out that for about 350 million standard cubic a day, which can be helped in terms of the that the BPT is predicting in relation to their own gas production. So that is the hope. I don't know, a lot of issues in relation to the marketing and development plan, but the government is not happy with respect to its own take. But with all that has transpired, one would hope that the agreement that they have signed is one that is palatable, one that is very sensitive, and not one that is signed under duress in an effort to show that Train 1 gets going.
Okay, let me ask Dr. Ramkisoon to respond to Curtis on the possibilities in the gas sector, especially this business of Shell filling a hole that BPTT has not been able to produce for.
I think, Tony, the whole issue of natural gas is at a point where we first have to recognize that we are not going to get the kinds of revenues from that sector as we used to get, or at least not get as easily as we used to through NGC. For all kinds of reasons. The cost, the availability, the players, the agreements that were signed some 20 years ago, and so on. And everything points to lower margin, points to even the possibility of closures as we mothballing of plants and so on, which we have been hearing about.
And we have experienced, a couple of them have closed, haven't they?
Yes,
yeah.
So that's right. So in that kind of environment, it calls for negotiation skills that are very intense, that must be very precise, that must be up to the standards of the multinationals. So I think that is what is required in that space, recognizing the fact of maturing fields and that we may or may not find the gas, although we seem to be much more optimistic about gas as opposed to crude oil. But what it says when we look back at the last 50 years at least is to say that the kind of income that we have had from this sector, we're not likely to have, not only because of the problems we are facing there, but things like climate change, renewables, and shale gas and shale oil. So again, that story there points to what we must do in terms of how effective we must be in terms of our negotiation to keep the downstream sector going, to encourage the new exploration activity. We clearly have to give more than we would have given in the past, and we have to take that on board. But it points to the fact that we needed to develop even more urgently the non-energy sector of this economy. In other words, if over the last 50 years we said that, look, yes, it is something good that we must do, then I think what the current circumstances pointing to, that our efforts at non-energy sector development must be heightened at this present time. Not that we must abandon the fact that we have some oil and some gas and their prospects that might be good. So while we do that, the kind of incentives, the value of incentives, the effort that successive governments have put into the energy sector, I would ask myself, what other sector have we had that kind of effort put into? Yeah. And I am not so sure that we see it in the rest of the economy.
Tony?
Yeah, sure.
I would like to say something really quickly. While I agree with a lot of what Dr. Ramkissoon says, I think that what we also have to do is think about how do we go further downstream of the energy sector, and perhaps Sano could speak to this. For example, the issue of melamine, which is available and which was made available to the manufacturers, and said, look, we can go further into resin, into manufacturing of those. In other words, link the manufacturing sector with the energy sector. And I don't know that we are thinking enough of that. I don't know that we are pushing enough of that, and even into things like pharmaceuticals and so on. And I think fantastic because and resin. How do we go further downstream so that you are in fact in a way reducing your risk on just the primary product and adding value to that primary product?
Yeah, Curtis and Dr. Ramkissoon, I want you to remain there because we have to take a commercial break.
This is Power 102, empowering you.